started much like we did last time and kind of click through so you can see the questions, and then Helen and I will kind of tackle those. And a few things we did put some visuals up for, and we will talk through additional resources that we can share as they are relevant to the question. Okay, so the first question is around testing. On the testing page of the IEP, what we consider to be state versus district-wide assessments. Folks have said they've seen many things listed in that section, such as SLO, MAP, STAR, midterms, classroom test, finals. So basically, what is a state test is your air test or your alternate assessment. So the tests that are required by the state, are end of course exams, those kind of things would be state tests. I have also been asked about where ACT should be placed on there. Really, that's not a state test, and it certainly is not a district test. You could list it under other. But again, when you're talking about ACT, the only accommodations are the ones that you have to submit for and get approved by them. So you can list it that way. When you're talking about district tests, that would be your SLO, which SLOs are going away anyway, but your MAP, your STAR, any of your diagnostic things, we really would not consider classroom tests to be district-wide, because generally those are going to be designed by classroom teachers and might not be, unless you're doing some kind of common formative assessment where everyone is doing the exact same thing. But certainly if everyone is using the exact same finals, then you might consider that district-wide. But usually district-wide assessments are going to be your DIBELs, your STAR, your MAPs, and those kind of things. So hopefully that clarifies that for everyone. Okay, and if no one has any questions about that, we'll go to question 2.
Okay, question 2 is about the transition page. Can you please provide some examples for the wording under course of study? Well, we have the state different definitions, and I think we're going to pull those up. This is what the state wants to see, basically saying whether they're college prep, courses for graduation, curriculum based on Ohio learning standards, standards extended, career technical, and CTE. But you can also add on to that, like if there's an emphasis on functional living skills or adaptive living. They just don't want to see that, meeting the school, like Field's high school graduation requirements, because if they didn't graduate from Field and they went somewhere else, they've gotten away. They want this more or less a general for across the state of Ohio that people use as meeting Ohio learning standards. I'm not sure if this was the question or if it was more about what if there's a student that might be going to saying they're going on to college, but oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So any questions on this part?
No.
Okay, we're going to actually show you a little example that we put together. So we would say under the course of study that Helen is enrolled in a general education course of study aligned to the Ohio learning standards to meet graduation requirements with an additional focus on self-management and self-coping skills. And that is really how the state would like to see you do something like that, where you describe the course of study, make sure that you mention it is aligned to the Ohio learning standards or the extended standards if that's appropriate, and meeting those graduation requirements. And then like Helen said, you can add an additional focus if the student has an additional focus on strengthening math skills or on adaptive living skills or whatever it is. So this is just an example of how you might word that. It does not have to look exactly like that. Okay, how do you treat a leap year in an IEP or an ETR? This does actually occur.
And this is the
And so this is a leap year, and it is something that has to be considered in your timeline. You can't just pretend that that extra day isn't there. So you do have to calculate for that when you are counting your days and make sure that you are still going to be in compliance for your timeline. So that is kind of an important thing to know. We do actually have a guidance document that addresses leap year, and there is actually a chart for calculating from the time of the ETR all the way through all of your dates, your 30, 60, 120 in a leap year. So if that is something that you would like, you can let us know. You can email us and ask us for that, and we would be happy to share it with you. Okay, so the next question, we had this pop up quite a bit before we were doing our deep dives about the date of the next IEP review on the front page of the IEP and how that is different from the end date. And this has been a source of frustration for many of us because, you know, we've talked about the fact that what is the difference between those. We actually went back to the OEC folks at the state and brought this up both last year and this year. We did share with folks who came to our deep dive trainings that the state does intend to remove this from the front page at the next revision of the IEP. However, that's not going to happen anytime in the near future. And so what they shared was people shouldn't be getting all worked up over this. It is simply intended to be a reminder. It is just a placeholder as a reminder to the team that you need to start looking at the IEP and be preparing for it before that end date. So if you mark it the same as the end date, they're not going to ding you on it. It is supposed to be before the end date, but again, it is not a hill to die on. They do intend to do away with it at the next rollout of the IEP. So anything that you are marking, whether it's the same as the end date or, you know, a few days before or even a few weeks before, it is only intended to be a reminder, a prompt for the team. It is not a compliance piece. Okay.
Okay, the other one was, another question, and I don't think it's probably going to involve too many of the people that are on this call. How should or can districts conduct observations for students attending online courses only? Well, that's going to be fairly individual for the whatever online school it is, whether they're going to depending upon whether there's an instructional situation that they can observe, like through an online classroom, and for their instruction, either before or during an instructional period where the observer watches the teacher or the related service provider delivering instruction, or it could be an observation in a home environment wherever the student is participating in instruction, because sometimes with related service and online students, the OT or PT will go out and either meet, if not at the home, you know, at a library or something. So like I said, it's probably, this isn't going to be a question that people on here are concerned about, but this is for, we did get this question from a couple people, so it's more or less an online, how are they going to be able to conduct observations? Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
When a reevaluation is waived, is the reeval date 3 years from the date the waiver was signed? Yes. And, you know, you don't want to waive a lot because, you know, that'll kind of prompt a little
Inquiry.
Yeah. So, but it is, you know, the reeval would be 3 dates from the date the waiver was signed.
And we just always give that caution, like Helen said, that, you know, what we don't want to see is a waiver twice in a row. And we do sometimes come across that where an evaluation was waived and then waived again, that's a really long span of time during which we would expect that a student changes pretty significantly and dramatically. So, we want to make sure that we're not doing a disservice to students by waiving a reevaluation more than we should. So those should be infrequent and far between.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that I've probably seen them more often in a high school setting where the student has, multiple disabilities. We don't want to bring up, once again, why the heck you give an IQ again and have to tell the parent, and they already know it by the time they're in high school. But just doing a re-eval to even talk about transition and whatnot would be a good idea. And actually, some of those kids are going to need that re-eval within a year. Is it 3 years? If they are either going on to post-secondary, college, and for some accommodations and other situations, they often, I think OOD still asks for information as far as ETR.
Right. So again, we just don't want to do a disservice to our students by, waiving that reevaluation, even if we do a review of records with even minimal additional testing if necessary, but at least bringing the team together and having that conversation is very important. So, okay, if an adult student doesn't want to continue with special ed services, the question was, do we waive the evaluation or exit them? And again, you have to remember that if a student turns 18 and there is not a provision of guardianship, then they, just like a parent, can refuse services in any fashion. So you wouldn't necessarily waive the evaluation because they are executing their right to refuse services. So at that point, you could exit them. Sometimes students, adult students, or even parents may choose to decline one or all of special ed services. And it's not a bad idea. It's not a requirement, but it's not a bad idea to have some type of form for that. Back when I was, teaching and then in an administrative role, I created a form because I actually had that happen a few times where a parent did not want a specific service that was clearly indicated by the IEP team. They may, for whatever reason, decline OT from the district or decline speech from the district, or they may decline all services, whether that's the parent or the adult student making that choice. They can do that. So you would just want to document that. And obviously you would be documenting that in a PRO1 as well. Again, not a bad idea to have some type of form that you use that you get their signature on, but an adult student does have the right to decline and refuse special services.
And in cases
Judy, I have a question about that.
Sure.
Can you hear me? It's Megan.
Yep.
Yeah.
I always remember them saying you can't cherry pick. Like if this is what the district decided is our offer of faith, that the parent can't say, well, I don't want this, but I do want this after the initial. They can't do that.
Right, but there are times when the state has allowed for, if, like, for example, if a parent says that their child is receiving outside speech, let's use that as an example. They're receiving speech from Akron Children's Hospital that's been ongoing, and they feel very strongly that even though there may be great collaboration, that it is too overwhelming, or that there's too much disparity between what the SLP at the district is doing versus what the student is doing. And that would certainly only be in cases where a student is getting intensive outside therapy, that they may say they don't want speech through the district because they're already involved in an intensive therapy program through Children's Hospital or through some other service provider, that they can then go ahead and decline that. And you are right, generally speaking, we shouldn't be cherry picking that we'll take this, but not that. It's not a menu that we offer. So you're absolutely right. But in certain circumstances, like the one I just described, you know, they could do that with the agreement of the district. The district certainly could contest that. So I do want to just clarify that yes, the district could say, no, we're not going to allow that. You could certainly contest that. But if everyone is in agreement, my point was you would definitely want to have some kind of form that you document that on. Also making sure that the family understands that at any point in time, they could change their mind and agree to receive the services that the district is offering. Does that help a little?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't typically happen, but I mean, yeah, we've had situations where it's pretty much more along the lines of the parent or the student doesn't like the related service provider, and
yeah, that's totally different, and you're absolutely right. You don't get to cherry pick then because, you know, well, I don't like this person. So absolutely, and you're right, those situations are few and far between, but I have seen them happen in the example that I gave, where a student may be involved in a very intense therapy program outside of the district, and so a parent chooses to not receive that particular service through the district. And again, that would only happen if the team was all in agreement with that. So it would certainly be the right of the district to contest that and say, no, you know, they weren't okay with that.
And I just want to
okay, well, that
add,
makes sense. Thank you.
I just wanted to add on the exit or the evaluation. That's why, you know, before the student turns 18 the year before, you really explain that to the parents that they'll become their own guardian. Even if the student is medically fragile and whatever, they still have to go through that process. But in a case like that, I certainly would be, I mean, that student probably isn't going to be waiving an evaluation or anything, but the hospitals and that are getting more and more particular about a student, you know, Children's Hospital's been involved with us some, and they used to be very kind of ignore the age of the student no matter what, but they're getting more and more particular about, you know, who has the say about the students, even medical. So I think it's really important that year before, for all kids, the discussion about, you know, they become their own guardian unless you do this, this, and this.
Yeah, exactly. No matter how significant their needs may be, if they don't take action, some families still assume that it is a given if they have a child with very significant disabilities that they will automatically become their guardian, and they really do need us to help point that out, that they need to start that process before, well in advance before the student turns 18.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a money process. I mean,
right.
There's different ways to go about it. And I know, Megan, you're on here and you were talking about possibly a transition fair, but we've had for a number of times when we have done transition fairs, we've had somebody there to talk about guardianship.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that does come up. But
Okay, if an IEP states that they can use their notes on a test, is that an accommodation or modification? Okay, let me just say, this has become kind of crazy with what's modifications, what's accommodations, and we've always explained if you're not changing the intent, the content for a student, it's an accommodation. If you're changing the curriculum or whatever by really modifying and the student's not getting the whole content area, it is a modification. We were just down at the state for an IEP ETR, and some people disagreed, and we even have SSTs that disagree. And if you go to other states, you'll see, you know, this would be an accommodation in our state, but a modification in that state. So I would say this is an accommodation. However, there's going to be a task force created at the state because of accommodations modifications. We don't know when that's going to start. We would hope to be able to maybe be a task force. They're going to, I don't know what they're going to put out as far as anybody who gets to apply or what. But I would say if the student is using notes that, you know, they've taken or whatever on a test just because of, you know, either short-term memory, trying to think of what else.
Yeah, if the student may have issues with recall, the student may have issues with being able to, being able to initiate and generalize, bringing up vocabulary and that kind of thing. So again, what we always go back to in our explanation, like Helen said, accommodation is to level the playing field. It is to provide access, so we are eliminating the barriers that the student's disability inherently places in their success in the curriculum. Unless you are changing the content and the scope and sequence of a curriculum, it is an accommodation. And sometimes people like to push back on that because they go back to, but that it's not fair. So we actually do have a little visual that we really like that we thought we would share today to answer this. But as Helen said, this is actually going to be a task force at the state because modifications is in the top 3 areas of non-compliance across our state. And we both, we're campaigning to be on that task force, so.
And one thing I want to say too, it's not like you're not taking the test, you're not getting the test ahead of time and making notes for the kid to answer all the questions. So, that would not be fair, but
right. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about giving them a tool, again, to help mitigate and minimize the barrier that their disability creates. So this is just a little visual that we like because, again, we often hear, sometimes we hear it from the general education population that, the things that we put in place for students with disabilities isn't fair. And of course, we all are in this field, we all agree fair is not always equal, but we love this because we love the analogy that teaching is a lot like doctoring. So kids go to doctors with different needs. Someone broke their arm, or they have a cough, or they have the stomach bug. What if the doctor said the same thing to everyone, that if you came in with a broken bone, you get cough medicine? Then only one of those children would actually get what he needs. And that certainly is not fair. And so it's important that we think about it in that way. It is the same thing in the classroom. Every student comes in with different needs. Some students have trouble focusing. Some students obviously think better when they are giving tactile activities. Some students have a deficit and cannot write what they know, but if we ask them verbally or we give them another means of communicating, we find out that they may have a greater depth of knowledge than some of their typically developing peers. So that's why differentiating for our students is so critical. So again, this is just a nice little visual that kind of spells that out. And again, we know here that we're preaching to the choir, but we just wanted to share things with you that can be sometimes when you get that pushback, that you have, a go-to answer of how you can explain. Okay. This was a question that we got from someone in our region, but we know that this pops up across our region and even across the state, that, sometimes families come and request an initial evaluation for scholarship, but then they never apply. And so the question was, then is the district responsible for the reevaluation? You might not even know where the student is. You've never heard back from the family. So we're assuming that they've landed in a private school. We actually put this on here so you could see word for word what the response was from OEC, that first of all, there's no such thing as an evaluation for a scholarship. However, we do want to pause and say, we all live in the real world, and we know for a fact that that happens out in your districts, that you have families requesting an evaluation for the express purpose of getting scholarship and going somewhere else. We know that happens. The district of residence obviously is always responsible for that unless otherwise ordered through child fine. So, you know, you do have to do your due diligence to do that under IDEA and then do the reevaluation, you know, for that. However, we would also say, and this wasn't a question, but for this particular office hours, but this has popped up quite a bit where we get asked about who's responsible when kids are in a private, you know, non-chartered, non-public school. It is the district where the private school resides who is responsible once a child has already been identified or they are already in that school. This question that we're being asked here is when they are in your district and they are coming to you, they're not already at a private school. If the child was already at a private school, then it is the district where that private school is located, not the district of residence. So we hope that that helps a little bit. The other thing that OEC said was if you are in a situation where the child and the parent can't be located and they've gone off your radar, then there is an EMIS entry for that as well. We think that you can enter that code to show that you know, you're not conducting a reeval because obviously you don't know where they are.
Okay, this one. This is one I was starting to answer prior. If the course of study does not align with the student's post-secondary goals, should you write something about that? And the example is the student is in the resource room for ELA and math and does not want to take a foreign language, but the student wants to attend a four-year college. Okay, if the student is in a resource room, I'm assuming they're on a modified curriculum, which would
Well,
not
that's
be.
not necessarily true. I mean, we have lots of kids, and I'm only speaking for Field, but I feel like I have a good handle on other districts. I would say, venture to say, there's a lot of kids in the maybe not a lot, but a good handful of kids in the resource room that are not on modified curriculums.
Okay, so basically the question then is just the fact that they don't want to take a foreign language?
Well, no, I guess my question is, you know, we have kids that have, you know, are in a resource room for a variety of reasons. It could be
Right.
behavior, it could be, you know, attention, it could be the fact that whatever, they do better in a smaller group. But then, you know, their post-secondary goal is they want to, you know, go to Kent State and pre-med, or what, maybe that's extreme, but even just attend a four-year college, they're not in college preparatory courses. And the parents don't want to change placement to have them in a gen ed class because maybe they've been in the resource room for so long and the kid doesn't want to change, and the comfort level and all these other factors that play into it. So really, we're not preparing them for their post-secondary.
Yes, okay. And some kids can go with just gen ed classes to college and they might do okay in a two-year college, but I think I would bring up in AATA that they are not taking college prep courses. They might want to look at possibly a two-year college, or think of, you know, possibly a backup, or find out why they want to go into pre-med. I mean, do they know all the components and all the schooling and all the, that they're not going to get all the accommodations they get in high school, because high school should actually resemble, the last year of high school should actually resemble what it's going to look like when you're in the first year of college. They can take general ed courses and get into college. That's, you know, that's happened. So if they're getting general ed courses and it's not modified, but I do think stating in the age appropriate transition assessment a need for either more preparation or looking at possibly starting in a two-year program and getting, you know, like starting with your associates or whatever. And go from there, because when I first read this, I was thinking modified curriculum, but you're right. I mean, if they really want to be college bound, but if the parents don't want them out in a general ed classroom, you could write, you know, that they're going on to a 2 or 4 year college. Taking a foreign language, I know most of your 4-year colleges require foreign language, but I guess looking at, you know, what maybe associate's program, like maybe Stark State, and they're aligned with Akron U and a couple of the other four-year colleges, you know, they may not ask for foreign language. But I guess the real thing is to definitely have either a backup plan or at least talk to the student. And I would bring it up in AATA that they need, they may need more preparation for college. And it's, you know, they might want to start looking at a 2-year college to begin with, or a technical school.
Right. So like Helen said, just kind of summarizing, you're absolutely right. You do need to capture that somewhere, because there is a disparity between their post-secondary goals and their current course of study. So if their course of study is not going to adequately prepare them for that, then you do need to capture that somewhere. So yes, like Helen said,
I would
you would
capture it in AATA,
Yeah.
saying that their present course of study may, you know, not prepare them. I mean, it's a gen ed course of study with accommodations, I'm assuming, but just being aware that it's not necessarily going to align, and will especially align with a pre-med goal, but
it's not going to
to
prepare
prepare
them,
them.
yeah, for that, for their what they have expressed as their post-secondary goal. And we always go back to too, we always say that is another reason why it's so critical to have those very honest conversations with our students and their families, so that they understand that. Sometimes they don't. And so it's important that we don't crush dreams, as we always say, but we also have to be the people sometimes to help provide a little bit of a reality check and make sure that our students fully understand exactly what is going to be required if they are going to go on to a 4-year college, and that family understands that as well, as we make those decisions about placement and the types of supports and services that they're receiving within their course of study. So it is critical that, yes, you want to document it, like Helen said, in the AATA, but also you want to have that very frank and you know, sometimes difficult conversation, but it's important that we do that.
You know, another question along that line is, I have seen in some IEPs where either in future planning or in the transition where it states, you know, Jimmy wants to go, you know, into the military, and then it'll say, you know, parent either agrees or disagrees with that. And like, you know, Mrs. Smith agrees with Jimmy's post-secondary goals, or Mrs. Smith thinks that that's crazy and she wants him to go to a 4-year college. So
Right.
where do you, like,
Well,
they're under 18, do you kind of, you could put both, obviously the mom wants him to do this, the kid wants to do this.
I put that in AATA in the age appropriate transition assessment, saying, you know, mom has expressed, and the student is under 18, but mom has expressed that she'd like to see him in a 4-year college. However, the student is really focused on attending the military. Basically, they could both have a gen ed course of study meeting, you know, graduation requirements, and do either. The big thing with military, and I don't even want to go down a rabbit hole with that, we're trying to get more clarification, is being identified and medication and whatnot. So I think there would be, you know, I'm trying to get more information. I have a little thing sent out, but there's supposed to be some sort of waiver, but there's
There
all
are
this stuff
exclusions.
about exclusions,
Yeah.
military being able to exclude kids that have been identified at 14, or they have to be off their medication. This one guy that was at a training post-military said a year. I've heard other things, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with this, but yeah, I think having maybe, you know, when there are like college nights or career nights, usually military's there. And I think having, you know, that discussion, that's something we could do in a career fair too, but, or a transition fair. But I think for this purpose, I would just say mom's focused on wanting him to go to a 4-year college. I think it gets more like you're going to the student as they get older in high school, because, you know, parents think they're going to control their kids, but when they get to, if he didn't go to college, or if he did go to college, that mom's not going to have any, she can't call the professor and say, blah, blah, blah. I know it has happened, but that student's his own, the colleges won't talk to parents. So
Yeah.
even if the mom wanted the kid to go to a 4-year college, she goes in and signs him up. If he doesn't, she can't force him to go. But I think what you're really asking is, make a distinction that this is what mom's thinking presently. This is what the student wants, and kind of, bring out the interest, needs, and strengths as it relate to either one. You can say, upon graduation from high school, John will attend a 4-year college or enroll in the military.
Yeah, so you can write the goals with either or. So, and like Helen said, it's okay to capture both. The bottom line is we always have to remember that the transition section, the goals are what the student wants, not what the parent wants. So in future planning, that does involve both the student and the family. It's okay to capture there that the family, may disagree with the student's choice. And like Helen said, you can also capture that in the AATA. But when it comes to the post-secondary goals, those goals are the student's goals. And so, we would first want to say, like Helen gave a perfect example, that upon graduation, John will either enlist in the military or enroll in a 4-year college, for whatever. So yeah, it is okay to include both of those, because obviously we don't want to, don't want to alienate the family, but we also have to be sensitive to the fact that, the student is ultimately the one that will be making those choices. And
yeah, and I think you can, make that distinction in the age-appropriate transition assessment. And then we could go about part of the service activity could be giving information, instructing the parents on, or not parents, instruction on, what 4-year college, instruction on military. It doesn't mean if you go to the military, you can't go to college either, because they'll pay for it.
right.
So I'm going down a rabbit hole. I think what you really want is to be able to make that statement in age-appropriate transition assessment, and then I think I would use the post-sec. How old is the kid? Or is this more generalized, a lot of kids?
Specifically, these are just high school I'm talking about. Just
Yeah,
more.
I would say I would use the or, because I used to tell people you couldn't use the or, but you can. So upon graduation from high school, John will attend a 4-year college or enroll in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, our last question is really about section 12. When we have students who are on alternate assessment, should you mark yes or no if they've already met and completed the participation requirement? So maybe they're in grade 12 and they've already done that, or they're not testing that year. They're in 9th grade, and I apologize, we had some glitches there. I see we have some typos, so I apologize for that. We are actually gonna say that we're gonna postpone the answer to this because this has actually changed several times over the last several years, where we used to say yes, and then we were in a situation several years ago where some of the software providers that districts use, it would cause an EMIS error if you said no, if you said yes, because then EMIS would be looking for a score. And if the student didn't need to test anymore because they were done, or they weren't testing in 9th grade, then EMIS was trying to find a score that didn't exist. So there was a time where we switched over to saying no, but again, there's been a lot of back and forth. We actually have this question out to the state to get a definitive answer on where we are now and what they would like everyone to do. And so once we get that, we will definitely update those of you who are participating in our office hours, and we will be sharing that also at forum as well when we get that update. But one of the other things we do just want to say is that's not a compliance indicator. So it's more just about making sure that we're capturing correctly the type of test the student would be taking. But again, I think that that's not something that we want everyone to get in a panic over. We will definitely get that clarification and share that out with everyone.
And I think there's also a place, I'm not looking at the page, but I know in the past, there's been a few times when a kid's either gone to another district and I'm thinking way back to OGT, district didn't know if they had passed or if they had met the requirement of participation or whatever. So, and same with alternate assessment, just, put the date in there that they took alternate assessment.
Exactly. That's one thing that we do want to make sure that everyone remembers is that once a student is done, you want to continue to document that on subsequent IEPs, because if you don't do that, we have had the situations arise where a student is 21 and looking at exiting at age 22, and then the team is not sure if the student ever, took alternate assessment and passed or met the participation requirement. And so then everyone is scrambling around trying to go back and look through old IEPs to get that information. So we do just want to remind everyone to make sure that you do document that on the subsequent IEPs once a student has done that.
I have a question about that, and I think I asked it before, we still can't get an answer to this. So if you have a student who takes the alternate assessment and doesn't score in the proficient range on alternate assessment, there is no way in EMIS to go in and excuse them from not passing the alternate assessment. And then when we go into our EMIS to look at graduation, it does say they're alternately assessed, but they didn't pass. So how does that work as far as graduation? Is there a way to put that in? Is there a such thing as excusing them from passing the alternate assessment?
You can't
Yes.
excuse them from the consequences of not passing alternate assessment. And I'm going to tell you.
Right, there's nothing in EMIS. You can't put it in EMIS. It won't, and they even asked at the EMIS coordinator meeting, there's no way to put in EMIS, there's no choice. It's like alternate assessment or not, and then there's end of course exams. You could put that in and say they're excused, but under alternate assessment, there is no choice of excused or not excused.
You're right. There's not an EMIS, and please know this is our disclaimer. We do not do EMIS work or student information system work. But what I can tell you, what we do know is that in your student information system, there is a way to set up rules so that it sort of defaults, that it knows if something is marked yes or no, then it knows obviously the student is being alternately assessed, they've met the requirement. And if I understand correctly, there is a place in there where you set up for those graduation requirements that it does recognize that there was an excusal from the alternate assessment. We can certainly go back and share with the state. We've heard this concern before about EMIS. We can certainly go back and share that there's not a place to document that. But I have heard other people say that in the graduation section that there is a place to indicate that. Again, it may not be in EMIS. It may be more like in your student information system. I'm not sure.
But they don't have to keep taking it until they pass it, correct?
No.
See, what we're going to find out, because I hate to say this, but we were told at the state a couple years ago, well, a number of years ago, we were told, oh yeah, they have to keep taking them unless you excuse them. And then Andrew Hinkle, when we brought that up at another state training, said, oh no, I've never said that. Well, we just got something and we're going November 7th and it's talking about an excusal again. And I had always told people just excuse them because I don't trust whatever. I shouldn't say it like that. And I'm being recorded, but this goes back and forth. But they don't have to take it again if you excuse them. And I've had people excuse them after. I used to tell people to excuse before. Like I said, there was a lot of conversation when he made the comment a couple years ago, and he said he never said that. And now we're hearing excusal again. And so when we are there on the 7th, that conversation is going to continue. But Yeah, just go ahead and excuse them is my, and right at the moment, we were told there wouldn't be anything other than a 10th grade test. And we will know more about that when we're down there on November 7th. So,
Yeah, so once we come back from that training for, the new alternate assessment, we will absolutely be asking some of these questions. We will also include your question about EMIS,
yes.
about there not being a place to identify that the student is excused from the consequences. And so what we will do, obviously, ladies, we always give updates at the special ed forum, and we will make sure that we provide those updates. And if there's anything that's urgent, we will send it out on our listserv as an update via email.
And I have a feeling after our training on the 7th, I could be wrong, that we may be sending out just a blast about something we didn't plan on hearing.
Yeah, because again, we haven't been there yet, so we don't know things that we were told in last year in the fall or in the spring look like they may have changed. So we won't really know until the 7th, but when we get back from that, we will certainly update everyone.
Okay.
Okay, well, sorry, I just gave us a black screen. I apologize. That really is the end of all of the questions that we had submitted. So if there are other things that you have that you want to ask, now is your chance. And otherwise, we will go ahead and end this month's office hours.
I have one that's come up about progress reports. Now, I know we've talked about it multiple times, but I don't know where the confusion keeps coming in. You guys would recommend reporting on both the goals and the objectives, but the state only requires reporting on goals, correct?
Correct.
Correct. And the clarification that I just made yesterday for someone was when I had conversation with them, when the new progress report came out, their response was, if you have taken the time to write objectives for a student, you need to be gathering data for that. They did create the new progress report so that you could report on objectives. You are correct. You are not required to, but they did sort of make the suggestion that you might want to.
Yeah.
And also bear in mind that if you ever found yourself in a process situation, or if a parent requests data, you have to be able to produce it. So although you may not want to report on it, you do have to be gathering that data and have it available if you are asked for it.